The morning light over Pearl Harbor looked harmless. Thin sun on a Sunday, trades blowing gently across the anchorage. On Battleship Row, the USS Arizona swung at her moorings beside the repair ship Vestal, lines creaking, flags stirring. Men in dungarees moved slow and easy, the kind of pace you take when inspection is days away and breakfast still sits warm in the galley. A bugler on the foredeck ran a scale. On Ford Island, a baseball diamond sat empty. The clocks were closing on 8 o'clock. Engines began to growl overhead. At first, it sounded like routine traffic from the Army airfields, Wheeler, Hickam, until the sound thickened into a swarm. Dark shapes appeared over the Waianae Range, low and fast, sun glinting off wings marked with rising suns. On Arizona's bridge, the officer of the deck raised binoculars, caught the banked turn of fighters over the harbor entrance, and felt the wrongness in his chest before he could name it. Then he saw the first stick of bombs walk across the airfield and lift dirt and tin into the sky, and the harbor erupted into noise. General quarters sounded. Men ran to battle stations, boots slapping steel. Hatches clanged, ammunition passed up hand to hand. The ship's captain, Franklin van Valkenburg, stepped from his cabin and climbed for the bridge as the first wave roared in. Sirens keened from Ford Island. Across the channel, smoke climbed from Battleship Row where Nevada, West Virginia, Oklahoma, and California took torpedoes in quick succession. Arizona, moored outboard of Vestal, was a big target that couldn't maneuver. Her guns began to speak anyway. 5-inch mounts trained up and spat shells. 50 cals stitched the sky with tracers that looked thin against the black shapes diving through them. At 8:06 a.m., a high-level bomber peeled away and let go. The armor-piercing bomb drove down through Arizona's forward decks near Turret 2 and plunged into the black powder and smokeless propellant stacked below. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the forward magazines detonated as one. A wind louder than the harbor tore outward. The bow lifted. A column of orange fire and steel plates rose through the foremast. The shock took men off their feet on ships tied far down the row. Where the bridge had stood, smoke and flames swallowed the silhouettes of Van Valkenburg and Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd. The blast destroyed everything forward of the ship's boat cranes. The foremast toppled. Gun turret 1 belched smoke and went still. The deck curled. The blast wave crossed the channel and set windows shivering ashore. Vestal's captain, Casson Young, was thrown into the water, clawed back aboard, and ordered his crew to cut away. Lines burned through. A tug shoved the repair ship off as burning oil rolled aft from Arizona and lit the channel. On Arizona, sailors who could still move went for the wounded and for hoses that instantly turned to steam in the heat. The water around the bow turned black with fuel. Men in the water beat at the flames with their arms and went under. Others jumped from the afterdecks and swam into oil that coated faces and throats and made breathing feel like drowning. The attack did not pause to make sense of the ruin. Torpedo planes knifed down the line of ships. Dive bombers found new targets. Machine gun runs raked the airfields to keep aircraft on the ground. Oklahoma rolled as her compartments flooded, and men inside beat at bulkheads no one could reach in time. West Virginia settled by the stern and burned. Nevada, wounded but with steam, tried to run the channel and was beached to keep her from sinking in the fairway. Everywhere the same rhythm played out. Alarms, fire, shouts, water hissing into nothing, hands searching for a friend, names shouted into smoke that did not answer back. On Arizona's afterdecks, a few guns kept firing. Powder and shells were carried from surviving magazines, while men coughed from the fumes. Hospital corpsmen dragged sailors to the shade of a shattered catapult cradle and marked the worst with iodine so the stretcher parties knew who to take first. Smoke thinned, then thickened again as the second wave bore in. Another bomb struck near the boat deck. The after superstructure buckled. Heat peeled paint from bulkheads. A sailor trying to pry open a door burned his palms to meat and did not feel it until he was safe on Vestal and looked down. By 9:30, the sky began to clear of attackers. The harbor remained a bowl of sound, water pumps hammering, hoses beating on decks, the slap of waves against hulls that no longer answered helm or throttle. Tugs nosed in and out, pushing burning rafts of oil away from ships that might yet be saved. Arizona's bow was gone to the waterline, a jagged crater open to the harbor. The ship had settled to the bottom in the shallow berth, her stern still above water, masts askew. Rescuers tried to reach pockets below decks. Welders burned into plate. Some men came out. One who had stayed at his post in a machinery space staggered into smoke and said he had to go back for his relief. He did not. By afternoon, the first casualty lists took shape in pencil on damp paper. Names spelled how a clerk heard them over the roar. Families in Honolulu watched smoke lean across the city and counted the minutes before telephones rang. On Ford Island, the medical staff set triage under the wings of shattered aircraft. Chaplains moved along a line and stopped only to squeeze a shoulder and move on. A nurse wiped oil from a face and found a boy underneath, not old enough to shave twice a week, whose first words were an apology that he'd lost his cap. Fires on Arizona burned through the day and into the next. The heat was so great that steel sagged and brass turned dull. Divers felt along wreckage in water turned to soup by spilled fuel and hot metal. They worked by touch, counting breath, listening to tapping that faded, then stopped. On shore, officers collected reports and annotated harbor charts with red grease pencil. Sunk, capsized, damaged, a fire. The numbers settled slowly into meaning. On Arizona alone, 1,177 men were lost, nearly 4 out of 5 aboard. Van Valkenburg and Kidd were among them, both later awarded the Medal of Honor for staying at their stations while the ship died under them. In the days that followed, the salvage plan took form. Oil was pumped off where possible. Unstable ammunition was flooded and removed. The broken foremast and bridge were cut away. Divers sealed compartments on ships that could rise again. Arizona could not. Her hull was torn, her spine broken forward. Crews salvaged some guns, instruments, and fittings for use elsewhere. They left the bodies the divers could not reach with the ship. On the surface, the flag went on flying from a jury-rigged staff laced to the ruined mast, the colors moving in a wind that smelled of char and salt and fuel. Word spread across the country faster than anyone would have believed possible a year before. Newspapers carried a photograph of the explosion, a bloom of smoke half the height of a cloud layer. The president asked Congress for a declaration of war the next day. Men lined up outside recruiting stations. Schools held drives for bandages and scrap. On the quiet days that winter, a slick of oil still seeped from Arizona's tanks and spread on the harbor in thin rainbows. Divers told each other they could smell it before they saw it, a sweetness under the salt that always meant the wreck was near. Years turned, and the harbor rebuilt into a fortress. Warships came and went with new radar antennas and camouflage paint, and the fight moved west across the Pacific. Arizona remained under the water, present in every morning muster when men glanced at the flagstaff and saw the white markers along Battleship Row. After the war, the Navy removed more of the destroyed superstructure to leave the wreck secure and out of the way of traffic. The ship was stricken from the Naval Register, but never left the water that had closed over her on that first morning. In 1962, a memorial opened above the sunken hull, a long white span set over the midship section with windows that throw blue light on the names of the dead. Visitors step into the stillness and hear the soft slap of water and the distant sounds of a working base. They lean over a rail to look down into a rectangle of sea where fish move through beams and plates now coated with life. A slick still rises in slow beads, what locals call the tears of the Arizona, and spreads on the surface like a message that keeps repeating itself and never grows old enough to forget. Survivors returned in ones and twos as years passed. Some had come up through the wreckage on the day and never went back below. Some had been ashore and ran toward the smoke with belts slung with gauze. On certain anniversaries, they stood at the rail and spoke the same few sentences: who they were with, where they were standing, what it sounded like when the deck lifted. A few chose to have their ashes placed inside the ship, to go home to a place that had never released their shipmates. Sailors from modern destroyers salute as if the crew might see it through steel and water. The facts of the morning are simple to say and hard to hold in the mind. The attack began just before 8. The magazine explosion tore Arizona open at 8:06. The ship settled and burned. The dead were counted and never fully tallied in the hearts of those who waited for a letter that did not come. War followed as surely as smoke follows flame. The shape of the harbor changed afterward, but the hole in it did not. It is there in the way the wind sounds under the memorial roof, and in the names carved into white stone. It is there in the flag that rises and falls over a ship that can no longer sail, and in the engine room quiet that returns when visitors leave, and the harbor resumes its work. If you stand there at mid-morning, you can still hear the harbor, tugs calling, a jet banking out of Hickam, the slap of a current on the pilings. The water streaks with a faint sheen for a moment, and then breaks apart. In the reflection, you can see the sky that looked harmless once. The sun, no different than it was on that Sunday. The same trades rising and falling across the anchorage where the first and most haunting loss of that day still rests. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.